Well, it's great to have your company again. Thanks for joining me here. And I thought we'd digress a little bit this month. It's been a really hard month. You're feeling that retrogression, the retrograde Mars, retrograde Mercury. Tyson, eat your heart out. No, we're going to talk about that because I think it's very, very important. But I want to digress in terms of the treatment of these retrograde planets and how they're normally looked at by Western astrologers compared to Vedic astrologers. And firstly, let's talk about the retrogression, because a retrograde planet actually gains power. It actually, it intensifies its power, either for good or for not so good. Guess how it's been working for me? Well, depends on which star sign or which ascendant or which lunar sign we're talking about. Because the retrograde planet, as it increases in its strength, obviously increases the portfolio of the particular area that it governs, is that both Mercury and Mars, being retrograde, just so happen to have exchanged their stellar positions. So what that means is that each planet, as well as ruling a sign, it actually rules 3 stars. There are 27 stars according to the Vedic system, and those stars are divided into 4 quarters, which we call padas, and that relates to a single 9th harmonic. Another chart, another discussion. I don't want to complicate it too much, but the fact that these stars are much more subtle indicate that the effects of the retrograde planet, depending on which star that it happens to be transiting, will determine really the most powerful effects for that transit, more so than the actual star sign, the sun sign, the zodiac sign that it is transiting. So the interesting thing right now is that Mars and Mercury just so happen to be in each other's stars. Mercury is transiting the star called Chitra. Chitra is one of the 3 stars ruled by Mars. And Mars just so happens to be in Pisces. This is sidereal, this is the Vedic zodiac, happens to be transiting through the Revati star, which is the star of Mercury. They've exchanged each other's stars. So this is what we call a mutual stellar reception. Mutual, they've exchanged, they're in each other's places, they're hanging out in each other's cribs, right? And they're retrograde, so they're empowered. And Mars is actually in Revati. Revati is the Pisces star of Mercury. And so what does this mean? What does it mean? Tell me. You have to look at the principles of these 2 planets, what they actually regulate on many, many different levels. So generally we know that Mars is the action planet. It's a physical planet. It's dynamic. It's sexual. It's fast and furious. It can be aggressive depending on its mood on any given day. So the planets are just like people. They're called grahas in Vedic astrology. And so their mood and their temperament is something to behold, really, depending on where they are. So Mars and Mercury are not considered the best of buddies. But I guess even if you had a friend and you'd, or a not so friend, and you'd exchanged, if you had a friend, if you had a not such a good friend, and for some circumstantial reason you had to spend time in each other's places, you wouldn't feel comfortable, but you certainly wouldn't damage the other person's place for fear of them damaging yours. So there's a sort of an unwritten law which sort of governs the behavior of these planets in this sort of mutual reception. In the Vedic system, they call it Nakshatra Parivartana Yoga. Nakshatra, star, Parivartana, mutual exchange, yoga, geometry, geometrical configuration, pattern, whatever you want to call it. So this is a pattern of mutual reception based upon the stellar position of these 2 planets. And so when these planets, which aren't such great buddies, start mutually receiving and transmitting the energy to each other through these particular stellar sectors. There can be, again, it depends on which of the 12 signs we're talking about here. And that's what I want to do the readings on this month, by the way. That's in brackets. We see a very, very intense energy. Mercury, the intellectual, analytical, the judgmental faculties. This is more or less an internal quality. Doesn't mean Mercury doesn't govern outside things, but its first sign, which is Gemini, relates to the intellectual processing, the thinking processes, also the communication. So these principles, which are governed by Mercury, have somehow been transmitted to this Martian star called Chitra. And Mars is over there in its star. And Mars, as we mentioned, is all of these dynamic qualities. So what does it mean? It can mean an excess of intellectual reasoning, an excess of nervous energy, overexertion. It can also, in the reverse, when we look at the action planet Mars being governed by the reasoning, it can be a lot of second guessing. And that's often what happens under the retrograde. We all know about the Mercury retrograde and how it does that reverse sort of thing where there's a review, there's a recalibration of your thinking, if you're making decisions or getting ready to take some step. The retrograde Mercury tends to pull back the thinking, communication gets all twisted and confused and what the hell's going on. Mars, on the other hand, as a retrograde planet, can actually be somewhat prone to mishaps, actions that aren't really being coordinated, when your mind is on something else. Your legs are walking over here, but your mind's over here. And so you have to be very careful of that. And so the retrograde planets, as I've said on a couple of the episodes, don't only relate, he agrees, they don't only relate to the process of rethinking things on the outside, decisions about where you're going to live, where you're going to work, how you're going to handle this discussion, you're going to sign the contract. It also has to do with a certain quality of inwardness, presence, being present. Of course, if your mind is over there and your body's here, it's not very zen, is it? It just, tumble down the stairs. I do it a lot. I've twisted my left ankle maybe 6 or 7 times in my life. I have a very, very bad relationship with Mars in terms of my foot because I've got Pisces rising and Mars is right opposite, slamming that left ankle. So, yeah, guilty as charged. So it's the presence of mind, the awareness of what the physical body happens to be doing, coordinating the internal processes of your being with the external processes of your being present in what you do as what you do. Now, that's the kicker. As what you do is a very different state of being. What does that mean? The action planet Mars is the doing planet. The Mercury is it's sort of a bridge planet in a way, bridging the outer activities with this sense of identity. The intellect is the bridge to the solar energies, what we call the self, the ego. The lunar energies, which are the emotional self. All of these levels comprise what we consider me or the self. So what I'm saying is this inner level, and the stellar positions of the planets are incredible because they don't only talk about this outer level, they are what are regarded as sukshma. The star signs themselves are what we call stula, outer manifestation. The sukshma is the internal processing of the experience. And here with the retrograde Mars and Mercury, we see precisely how the retrogression gives you the opportunity to really start to coordinate the outer activity with this inner sense of presence or mindfulness, as that's Zen Buddhism, right? They're all about mindfulness. But that happens naturally in many circumstances where you're doing something that you actually love to do. You step out of that space-time continuum and there's this sense of fresh, pure, alert presence. And that's a creative process. We have to get that essence and bring it into every moment to, I suppose, bring our experience into a homogeneous state. Now, let me make it very, very clear. That doesn't mean you're not going to have bad days like I've had for the last 4 or 5 days, right? And I'm not going to go into the detail. But the presence or awareness is a very, very unique mercurial expression, which, if during the retrograde path, that retrograde inward pull, gives you the opportunity to very, very clearly distinguish between the thing that's being done, the thing that's being observed, the outer experience, and the observer. Quite a scientific revelation to the particle physics tribe, but nevertheless they came to the same conclusion that the observer is, of course, a very unique part of the experience. We often forget about the observer. So that's when I said I want to digress. I want to talk about looking at this retrogression as a spiritual tool for bringing your attention back into the moment, bringing it in alignment. It's like, the camera when you've got the adjuster there, when you're just trying to focus the image, it's all a little bit blurred. So that focus is actually the bringing back of the awareness into the action, which is Mars, which is also retrograde. That second guessing, that rethink, that reappraisal is necessary. And then that continuum that we normally call space and time it's really, really adjusted to your sense of being in this moment. It becomes less of a resistance and more of a flow, irrespective of what's happening in that flow. And that, I think, is the secret. That, I think, is the subtle sukshma element that's being given to us now during these retrograde motions. The other thing, too, that is an interesting concept is the speed of these planets. I heard it somewhere that if you take Saturn's speed, Saturn is the significator of death, suffering, all of those horrible things we try to ignore and avoid. But its speed, if you look at a horoscope, the speed of that planet will tell you, for example, if it's moving in a very, very slow fashion, it actually forecasts the type of death a person will have. Will my death be drawn out, painful, delayed? If the planet Saturn is moving slowly, it's one factor that will tell you or give you a preview of what's likely to play out in that area of your life. If it's moving fast, then the death will be swift, nice clean exit, as they say in my tradition. Good clean exit. So the speed of these planets, when these are relative speeds, of course. People often think that a planet is physically moving in reverse. It doesn't actually happen like that. It's like two cars on the highway, one moving a little bit faster than the other. The one that's going slower appears to be moving backwards. It's not actually moving backwards. It is all in terms of relativity. So there's also relative speeds. Sometimes when both of them are exactly at the same speed, this is what's called the stationary position of the planet before it moves retrograde, and then later on, before it moves forward, there are these relative moments where the planets in their retrograde and forward motion appear to be completely stationary, and they are very, very powerful moments. It's a really great idea to take a look at when those retrograde moments move into the stationary points, because these are big turnarounds. These are points at which the energy shifts, the experience you have can shift, and also your awareness, which we're talking about here as the primary objective of how to use these retrograde planets will be of use at what point. So later in the readings for the month of November, I'm going to, I nearly forgot, it's all that retrograde energy. I'm going to give you the dates for those, and I'm going to focus very strongly on these two particular planets, especially for the first part of the month. There'll be some changes later, but I think it serves us well to study some of these planetary principles in a little bit more detail and see exactly how they're going to play out for you in your life. So I hope you'll hang around. I hope that's not been too technical. I remember my dentist friend, Steve, he used to say to me in the early days, cut the bullshit, just tell them what you're trying to tell them. So sorry, I'll be a little bit more mindful of not getting too technical and just try to make it a bit more appeasing and easy to assimilate. So look forward to giving you your reading for November 2020 and focusing pretty much on Mercury, Mars retrograde in this first part of the month. So tune in, subscribe. I'll see you shortly. Bye-bye.